Past the shoulder, Arthur discovered the habit of listening to the house the way some people discover a taste for bitter things, slowly, against his first instincts. When he first moved into the brick townhouse on Weaver Street, he thought only about how the light fell on the long hallway. It ran straight as a hung plumb bob from the front door to the study at the back, with high plaster walls, where a person who had come into money and age in the same year could put a lifetime worth of gilded frames. Every evening around 6, the late sun came down the street and put a gaslight color across that plaster, and the silver in the old mirrors picked it up like a story they were rehearsing for a night performance. He collected mirrors because the town had given him the excuse. Graymouth had been a mill town, when mills held their breath through whole winters, when women in aprons let steam out the windows and lie out into the street, when the ferry ran on a tideboard nailed to the dock shed, and somebody with a pencil wrote black diamonds in a column labeled low and high. The mills had failed with a drama nobody asked them to, and the antiques came out of foreclosed houses like memory being priced. He had money then from the sale of a company he had loved, in the way you love a person who never looks at you in the morning. He found that if he stood in a little shop on the South End and looked past the piles of kidney-shaped tables and forgotten teacups, a mirror would let him see not himself, but rooms where men in waistcoats argued with their own hair. Women in high collars stared at a window that forgot to be honest. Children were groomed into a dress that would behave. He brought them home. He hung them with care, measuring distances from the floor and from the corners, because he believed that in a beautiful life everything should know its place. He named none of them, except in the private way a person names the past. He thought of them by their frames. The Baroque whale at the middle of the hall, the narrow provincial in olive wood with braid, the thin one in tarnished silver he kept by the stairwell for the satisfaction of its bleak truth, the terrible bright rectangle he hid in the study behind a plate because the gilt offended him, and he could not be rid of it for what he had paid. He liked how silvered glass looked at dusk. It could be the color of a kept promise. He would make himself a cup of tea, and the mug would leave a ring he wiped right away, because rings turn counters into classrooms, and he had no appetite for that. The refrigerator hummed with the energy of a well-managed mind. The towel on the oven handle made a neat line when he folded it into thirds. The receipt from the auction, or the shop, or the estate sale would go in the little bowl by the phone, and the phone would not ring, because he had learned the world will leave you alone if you don't lower your voice. On the night the wrongness began, he had done exactly that set of small domestic rites, the ones that made the house admit him as its proprietor. Tea, the ring, wiped, the towel, the receipts, the refrigerator giving his attention back to him, the traffic light on Weaver and Pike tapping through its cycle, red, green, yellow, with such fastidious attention to time that he could take his own pulse by it if he wanted to be a parody of himself. He had a little cough, a winter leftover. He stood in the hallway and looked down its length, where he could see the notch of the study door, left slightly open as always, an invitation to a room that did not love him. The hall felt good. He had been out earlier buying a box of picture hooks and a length of chain at the hardware store. The counter made that cheerful series of barcode beeps when he paid, and he imagined each beep sealing his intention. He had hung 2 small ovals that afternoon, both cracked in precise, confident ways, age that had made a decision. He admired them now, their tilt, the way their black ribbons let them hang a little, as if they were listening to his kitchen. The flicker came as if a moth had passed, but there was no moth. He stopped the way a body stops when it hears a change in its own rhythm. He turned to the heavy mirror he privately called the whale. The whale sat across from the study door, and when the door was open it caught a sliver of that room and a sliver of himself, and the long line of hall in between. He looked into it and saw, not his own person, but a woman where he would have been, standing in a room he recognized as his hallway by the trick of the whale's carved bottom corner, a detail he could always spot. The woman was in a dress he knew with his skin, high collar, the stiff lace looking like breath held. The color in her face had been taken out like a property dispute. Her eyes were not looking at him. They were looking past him with such attention that he turned before he had time to teach himself not to. Only his own long hall, the study door, the empty air, the towel on the oven handle white-edged in the back room. He turned again to the mirror. The woman's mouth was open, not dignified. The face a person makes when a person tells you the world is ending in your particular house. He moved his hand up, and his hand in the mirror did not move. She stood with her hands at her sides as people show their hands when they finally believe the story about God. He went to the next mirror because it is easier to see if two are confused than to admit one is. The next showed a man in a soldier's uniform from a century and 2 wars ago. It showed an unsoldierly face, hollow and frightened, as if the uniform had been stolen. The soldier SIs were the woman SIs, and their attention was fixed past where Arthur stood. In the narrow olive-wood braid, a child clutched a faceless doll, and the doll's absence of a face should have been the worst of it. But the child's mouth was open so far, the shape of the palate showed, and so that could be worse. Arthur's heart thumped with the exact dignity of a heart that has been asked to stand up in a meeting and has found it cannot. He stood frozen long enough to recognize he had been frozen. Then he did the thing that is the honest confession of a man who thinks he can arrange the world if he moves his arms politely enough. He took the towel off the oven handle and walked down the hall and hung it over the whale. The mirror accepted the towel with respect. The linen made a flat, easy rectangle. He did the same to the olive-wood braid and the soldier, tearing the towel in 2 for a second modesty. He had a stash of old sheets in the closet, the sort you can rescue from a laundromat for $1 because they have a wide hem you can beat into submission, and he flung these over another Baroque frame and the narrow silver in the stairwell. The hallway looked like a woman surprised in her underclothes. The study door stubbornly showed itself. He leaned. The refrigerator hummed without concern. The traffic light at the corner said red to the nobody on Weaver Street. He felt the thing rooms have in common with bodies. He had made the room hesitate. In the morning, the kitchen felt like a kitchen that had done its work without him. The mug he had left by the sink had dried its ring and left it clean. The towel he had used to cover the whale hung over the chair, and he could not tell if he had left it there or if someone had. He folded it into thirds and put it back where a towel likes to be. He lifted a sheet and saw his own face in the old olive wood. He looked worse than he had wanted to. The soldier was gone. The child and the doll were gone. He was himself a man in a sweater in a row house, a man whose receipt from Southside Antiques had slipped under the little bowl by the phone, as it always did a man who boiled water, who checked the tide board online, to imagine being a person who notices the difference between a 5-foot full and a 6-foot full. He made tea. The mug left a ring, and he wiped it the way a person who is still trying to be that person wipes a small circle and makes it vanish. He did not tell anyone. He did not have anyone to tell it to. He had been that kind of person for a while, the sort of man whose conversations are arranged like furniture, a few good pieces that will last, and the rest covered. Miriam had been the opposite in the years when opposite had helped. She was gone, 2 winters, and by gone he meant took the train upstate to her sister, a slow departure that looked like living until it found the other kind. He realized he had started collecting mirrors in earnest after she left, as if he could make a house full of surfaces rehearse for a person who stood in front of them without going translucent. At lunch, he walked down to the deli on Pike because he cannot salt a pan for himself at noon without feeling melodramatic. The traffic light at the deli corner had a misaligned hood that made its faces look droopy. Despite this indignity, it did its job. Inside, the barcode scanner sang for a line of men with plastic gloves and women with hair pulled back squarely. The beeps were the same in every room in the world. He counted the beeps without meaning to, like a man counting a rib to see if it had broken in a fall. The woman bagging his sandwich put the receipt in the bag without asking, and he fished it out at the door and folded it in half and slid it into his pocket. He threw it away when he got home because he had no appetite for paper, remembering what he did not need it to. The little bin by the back door filled with oval receipts, rectangular receipts, long spoolie receipts that kept their static charge and leapt and stuck themselves to the last thing he was trying to forget about. He told himself not to walk toward the hall. And then when you forbid yourself, you walk like a cork toward a place in a glass that wants you. The mirrors were where they had been, save the silver by the stairwell. It had moved. He keep it at the end of the hall, a narrow rectangle that threw back no flattery, and he had liked being weakened by it. Now it hung 2 hooks down. It must have swung when he flung the sheet. There was no other answer. He lifted the sheet. The silver underneath looked like the back room of a tavern, and his face in it looked borrowed. Behind his face, the hallway. Behind his face, in the margin of the glass, something else the mind at first will not say aloud. The woman in the lace? The soldier? No. A face cut down to one thing, a stare past him. He turned and saw only the air he kept bending to. He put the sheet back and walked away because a body must practice walking away if it wants to go on being invited by itself to dinner. He slept badly in a thorough, uncreative way. He woke at 1 and walked to the kitchen to listen to the refrigerator. He woke at 3 and stood over the sink and let the hose water run for a minute. Not because of any advisory, but because standing still at a sink makes a man think he is being tidy about something. There had been a notice on the building door last week about mains flushing. He had taken a picture of it because that made it belong in a place in his mind that labels and dates and does not ask for metaphors. He made tea. He told himself he was not waking to check the mirrors, and then he checked the mirrors. He knew in his skin he would dream of faces. He dreamed of black diamonds on a tideboard instead, the ferry schedule with its chalk. When he woke to the alarm for the morning news, like a man with ambitions he did not believe in, he had the sensation of having been watched by numbers who would tease him with decimals if he behaved himself. On the 3rd night, he set the phone on the hall table and opened the camera because the camera teaches you what the room looks like when it is forced to be a witness. He thought, "You will be revealed as silly, Arthur. You will have on your phone a film of a man lifting sheets and showing himself his own face, and then he will put the sheet back and you will go to the deli and it will be Friday, and the barcode beeps will be busy in the hardware store as well, and you will go home and become another man with a clean fridge and a precise towel." He set the phone and pressed the red dot and made himself say, out loud but soft so as not to invite the neighbors, "This is nothing." The hall breathed. When a house breathes, it is wood settling or a seam in plaster trying to scorch its memory into someone who does not care. The refrigerator behind him in the kitchen hummed exactly right. He lifted one sheet, then another. His own face, and then his own face, and then a man in a uniform he did not recognize because it belonged to a country from a war he believed had not produced a uniform like that. Arthur's stomach turned that small, empty nuisance way. The man's mouth opened as if a quiet room would be offended by anything louder. The man's eyes, there was a trick of glass here, Arthur S. mind insisted, looked past Arthur S. shoulder with the attention of a person being asked to describe a thief. Arthur turned. What he saw was the study door, the note he had pinned last spring about remembering to call the furnace man in September, the little corner where the wall had a hairline crack piers could be built on. He turned to the mirror, and the uniformed man was looking at the same place he had been looking. In the next frame, a child clutched a doll with no face, but the doll's dress had had a hem once that somebody took time on. That human thing you should never notice when you are frightened. The child's mouth looked like a warning, past Arthur's shoulder where he could not see the scare. He held his own shoulder because nobody else would. His appetite went. You cannot run a life without appetite unless you put a schedule on it that stands where appetite would otherwise stand. He wrote on a page a set of hours he would permit himself to do the things a body is expected to do for itself. 8, breakfast, noon, lunch. 7, dinner. In between, the housekeeping that kept a mind that tried to run away from a set of mirrors physically in a room. Towel folded, receipts trimmed and placed, fridge wiped clean, traffic light watched from the living room chair, tideboard checked. Barcode beeps in small doses at practical places, paper goods for the kitchen, bleach for the floor where a man's shoes bring in the day, hooks for the hung frames. He did not cover the mirrors now because covering them made them seem like bodies, and he had learned from a winter the year before that there is a limit to how much you can behave as if a thing wishes to be grieved. The man at the hardware store told him the city was considering a boil water notice because of a valve that liked to fail when men stood near it. "Just a heads up," he said kindly, "out of an abundance." The phrase had become a lyric for people who needed to say something on the phone and then wanted to go home. Arthur bought 2 jugs of water and felt foolish carrying them up Weaver Street in daylight, as if he had been told to dress in a costume for a parade he had never learned the song for. That night at 11, the text from the city arrived. Boil water advisory for Bankside and North. Rolling outage possible between 1 to 3 a.m. He ran the tap and encountered that honest chemical smell you pretend not to notice if you live in a place and prefer to stay in love with it. He boiled water and poured it in the glass jar he kept because the jar had the dignity of a jar. He went to the stairwell and listened. The stairwell fluorescent hummed like a small apocalyptic insect, and he found that sound against his will reassuring. He did not invite anyone into his house. He hadn't for months. He told himself a story about privacy, and it was only partly a lie. He worried about having anyone stand in that hall and say, "What are you doing?" And then he would have to pick a sentence to fit a man without children who moved his towel around like a ritual. He had Miriam once to do the kind of sentence you use in your kitchen and in beds and in station wagons. They hadn't been married because they had been trying to be good to something that they decided required them to remain themselves. It had worked until it didn't. He kept a note she had written in a drawer in the study. "Call me if you need to remember who you are." He had never called. When the power went out, it did it like a controlled heart, not a drama. The refrigerator hesitated. The living room light gave its breath to another man in another house. In the dark, the hall held its shape. The traffic light at the corner kept the neighborhood alive. That light must be on a different line than the houses. It cast itself through the transom over the front door with the confidence of factory sequences and red-lit exit signs and other small bosses. He went to the door and looked at the street. The building across from him had that old light poured out around its doorframe, a narrow halo that's really just bad carpentry. The air smelled like water passing iron. Somewhere on Pike, a radio took over for a man who had gone to bed. Someone down at the ferry used a flashlight like a hammer. He stood in the hallway because he couldn't stop himself. If a man believes a story about a hall, he will be faithful to the hall. He looked at the whale. It looked like a covered piano in a room that is not supposed to have music. He did not lift the sheet. He went down to the stairwell mirror, the narrow silver. He lifted the sheet there. The stairwell had become a photograph of a stairwell taken when nothing at all was happening. A man with a quiet face in a dark sweater stood looking at where he ought to see himself. In the far left of the glass plane, a woman in a high collar looked past his shoulder in terror. He turned, and his shoulder saw house. In the far right of the glass, a picture of a child twisting to run. Their faces pointed toward a place he could not inhabit with his eyes. The emotion in those faces made most of the words that belonged to him make no sense. He put the sheet down as if he had been told to show respect in a room where a body lay. After that, he began to watch for signs, because a mind does that. He saw a small shift in the angle of a frame that would not be moved by gravity alone. He saw the traffic light's yellow lag, just a fraction too long. He smelled a faint river smell in his kitchen on a night when the tideboard said low, slack, and wind from the east. He found a receipt from the hardware shop folded into quarters under his pillow, a thing he did not do. He saw condensation on the inside of the staircase window on a warm night. He listened not for the refrigerator, but for the change in the refrigerator, and found himself waking to it before it made any discernible difference. For 3 days, he told himself he was experiencing the symptoms of being alive during a week when systems had their reasons to apologize. He lined every apologizing reason up and asked it to testify. Water valve, rolling outage, OS update on the phone, reduced hours at the deli. The ferries moved to a modified schedule because the tideboard had to be replaced. A notice on the antique shop door that the owner had a cough. The barcode reader at the grocer refusing to accept a price and beeping its modest refusal for items that offended it. The stairwell light, failing and returning. Its hum turning into a note he could have sung. A siren on the bridge, testing itself with no fire consuming anything. The hiss of the old radiator as a rumor of winter that had overstayed. Every explanation stood up and gave its name. Altogether, they did nothing to reduce the look of those faces on the glass. He could no more reason about them than he could tell the river to be clean. He began to walk in the hall without glancing, like a man who suddenly pretends to be shy in his own kitchen. On the 4th day, a man he knew from the auction house texted him a photo of a mirror in a lot they had not yet catalogued and asked, "Yours?" Arthur looked at the photo and saw a frame he could have argued with in public and a glass that had been cleaned badly, leaving smears of daylight on a cloudy afternoon. He went anyway because a house will lose you if you let it. The auction house sits at the near edge of the industrial district, a part of Graymouth where the buildings have started to pretend they always planned to be empty. A city truck was at the corner. A man in an orange vest stood and told drivers to be patient by lifting and lowering a sign that said, "Stop in one direction and slow in the other," the ethics of the town in one hand. Inside the house, a fluorescent tube buzzed in a manner that reminded a man to be patient. Near the door, a woman ran receipts through a little printer with serrated teeth that chewed and made the end curl up as if the paper had opinions. In the back room, the stacks were in their usual positions, the towers of old chairs that no longer had opinions, the crates of crockery, the mismatched lamps with their goodbye shades. The mirror stood against a wall. It wasn't much. He didn't want it. He bought it for $30 to be polite. When he reached for the cash, the barcode scanner on the counter beeped as a man bought a box of picture hooks, and the beep under the fluorescent was the sound that lives in the part of Arthur's mind where the faces live. He stopped, his hand with the cash hovering over the counter as if to make his arm into a proper ledger. He looked away and made his hand do what he had brought it to do. The woman put the receipt in his hand, and he folded it in half and into half again, into a nervous little square, and put it in his pocket, and then took it out and pushed it into the box with the mirror, because he could not bear the sensation of it under his fingers. He would have been the kind of person who carries gasoline in his car if he had not taught himself that if you carry the thing, you'll ask the world to give you the chance to use it. He carried a blanket. He carried rope. He took the mirror home and put it at the far end of the hall across from the whale, in an arrangement he had been avoiding because facing glass to glass can make a corridor into a prank. He told himself he would not look. He went to the kitchen. He made tea. The mug left a ring. He wiped it. He stood with his hand on the counter and waited for the refrigerator to change its tune. When it did, He could feel the change in his teeth. He walked to the hall. The new mirror and the whale were facing each other politely, the way two men will in a library. A person thinks he will see infinity free from personality when two mirrors face. This is not what the human eye sees. It sees the failure of infinity to meet expectations. It sees dust. It sees his own breath in the air and the trick of the light insisting on everything else. In the whale, he saw the new mirror making an endless corridor. The mind always pretends to be a miracle. In the new mirror, he saw the whale making the same corridor. In the corrugations of that corridor, he saw figures. The woman in the lace, the soldier with the hollow face, the child with the stoic doll. Not one of them looked at him. He felt them knowing he was there and not wanting him to move their gaze, which stayed past him. He had brought the thing in the hall at church and taught it to stand where it could sit and needed nothing. He sat on a chair in the kitchen with his back against the counter and let his skin be his rope. He slept there. He woke to the refrigerator. He woke to the traffic light. He woke to the static of a radio in the apartment above him. The noise in between music and the language in that noise went straight to a part of him he had kept honest. He imagined all the faces now, in all the frames, not arguing with him, not asking him to do anything, but leave them the ability to remain what they were for as long as they could bear it. He had a physical revulsion toward the sheet drawer. He closed it with the heel of his foot as if it might speak. He had once helped his father make a mirror. It had been a summer in a garage behind a row house, an exercise in patience that taught him he has little. Silver nitrate and sugar and secret bitterness in the mouth. The smell before the metal takes the glass and the showiness of the turn. He remembered the way his father, who had believed in all the things men like him were assigned to believe in, held the plate up against the light and sighed like he cannot help but love the stupid stubbornness of surfaces. He remembered his father saying, "All silver wants to do is return to ore," as if ore was a religion and silver a sinful monk. He did not know why he remembered that now, but he did. And the ongoing fact that every night he could think of Miriam and of the way her hair smelled when she came back from the ferry, and of her laugh when he bought a bad vase, and the fact that tonight he thought of his father and smell and paint and sugar, felt decisive without offering a way to act. The next day he got emails from the city, the sort with official logos, the sort you know require a committee to produce. Boil water remains in effect. Do not panic. Do not flush more than necessary. A valve has been delivered, out of an abundance. He walked to the ferry office because he liked to see the tide board in a place where chalk meets wood. They had changed their board. A temporary vinyl chart had been hung with clips, and the black diamonds were printed in a font that did not admit he was here. The air smelled like rope, and the parts of fish people lie about. Men in bright vests moved cones on the street as if that could make the sense a person expects. When he was young, he had thought industry would always be a kind of person who knows how to write the letter R in a beautiful way. Now he knew it is a person who can ask another to be patient without promising anything afterward. He went home with the sort of bread you buy when you are trying to be the type of man who is not moved by anything in particular. He ate half of it standing up because that way you do not have to lie to yourself by arranging a plate. A woman on the radio said in a voice perfected to carry a municipal sorrow that bottled water would be distributed tomorrow in the lot behind the community center. He looked at his glass jar and thought, "You are a bottled water." That evening at sunset, the mirrors did their proper work and caught the gaslight color from the street and turned the hall into a thing you would photograph if you were that sort of person. Arthur stood and did not photograph it because he cannot give anyone a reason to ask about his hall. The faces were not there. His own narrow person met him in the glass. The study at the end of the hall made a low smile of its half-open door. He felt like a man who had misread a book for a long time and is stuck with the book and its mistake. He is not a man who dreams bright dreams. He dreams equipment, The ferry horn, the hall's old radiator. The little electric meter at the side of the house, clicking in a rhythm intended to be unreadable. The hose water in the building's pipes making a throat at the stairwell. That night, he woke to the sound of a person in the hall who was not a person, and the way his body knew that made him annoyed with it. "You are an instrument," he told himself. "You tattle on yourself." He stood. He walked. He stopped. He turned at the study door. He looked toward the whale, his own face, pale. In the bottom corner in the border, the woman again, the collar making a geometry a sculptor would admire, her mouth open in an elegance of fear. He turned to the stairwell mirror and saw a man whose uniform he could not identify by design, a style stolen from a century that had not decided its eyes. The soldier's mouth was open. The child with the doll was beside him, smaller, both eyes turned toward a place 3 inches to the right of Arthur's shoulder. He had been trained by a life to stand still in rooms where no one would admit to something happening. He did not move. He also moved. His eyes moved. He used the stare he had learned in museums, the one that lets you see something in the corner of a painting without the guard noticing. What he saw was not a thing, it was a subtraction. It made the air beside him a little harder. He thought, "It is not a who, it is a what." He thought, "It is a what I have earned." He thought, "It will be at my shoulder because I spend too much of my time arranging the other side of the room." He stood until the soldier S face looked less imaginative and the child S mouth made the shape of an adult lie. He stood until the refrigerator hummed again. He stood until the traffic light threw its color and then took it away and then offered him another. He realized that at some point in that standing, he had put his hand to the exact place the faces were watching. His fingers had not reported anything to his mouth. He could feel his own pulse there. He held it to reassure himself he was permitted. The best you can do, then, is clean. He took a bucket to the back stoop and filled it from the hose, the water with its municipal honesty, smacking the bottom and bouncing into him the smell of the hose itself. Hot rubber committed to tap, gathering around his lower legs like a dog. He took a brush and scrubbed the threshold as if thresholds have emergencies. He filled another bucket to carry upstairs to wash the stair treads, because the stairwell had been complaining. He had always noticed that the stairwell takes other people's smells and makes them small and precise, cabbage into apology, soap into confession, detergent into sermon. He washed the stairs until the brush foamed at the edges, and then he rinsed, and then he stood with his hands on his knees and breathed like a person who will never be allowed to be dramatic in public. He pulled the stairwell fluorescence chain, and the light gave him its mechanical noise. It went through his jaw to his ears. The stairwell made itself into a place that might keep a thing from being confident. He slept in the long chair in the kitchen with the towel over his face because he has believed in the usefulness of a towel since boyhood. The refrigerator started itself and made him love the idea of families. The barcode beeps in the grocery the next day belonged to other people's budgets, and he found he could listen to those beeps without wearing them himself. He walked home past the ferry office and watched a man in a vest write on the board with chalk to make it look like someone had decided how the day would go. In the afternoon, the city published a new notice with stern cheer. The boil water would be extended through the weekend. There would be bottled water at the community center. Out of an abundance. Avoid showers, use caution when washing, hose bibs in older buildings might run discolored. Let lines clear. He did what the notice had taught him to do, which is to set the tap running and watch the white water turn clear and pretend to pour away a story into the drain. He boiled. He prepared to keep the day moving by using his arms. At dusk, he made tea and left the ring, because the ring meant a thing had been there. He folded a sheet, not to cover the whale, but to put it in front of the study door on the floor, because if something came down the hall, it would have to step on the sheet and leave a print he could love. He didn't believe what he was doing. He also wanted the print. He set a receipt book on the narrow table by the door with a pen you had to use pressure to make right, because the city had given him the feeling that pressing had become a virtue. He wrote the hour in the book. 7:18. He went to the kitchen and stood, the towel on the oven handle folded and refolded and hung with the exactness of a metropolitan official. He waited. He heard nothing until he heard the traffic lights' minor hum again. He slept and woke to a sound like a jacket moved off a chair. He heard chewing, the way we name chewing when what we are describing is small and mechanical, not hunger, more the work a small jaw does when it is not present elsewhere. He stood. He walked down the hall. The sheet in front of the study door had a footmark on it, a mark that looked like a person in socks had walked across it, which was insult and relief at once. He looked at the whale. The study reflected back, his own chest rising in the movement from fear to decision, and there, in the corner again, the woman and the soldier and the child. They had refused to become background. The place at his shoulder felt colder in the insolent way a refrigerator can be insolent when it wants you to open it. He did not turn. He stepped closer to the glass. He lifted the sheet as if that would move anything under. He did not want to see a hand. He wanted to see the pressure on the opposite of a hand. He did not. He saw himself a man with his face actually not as bad as he feared a man who could still pass as someone doing an ordinary job for the day, a man who could make tea and fold a towel and keep a record of things in a ledger and use the word ledger without breaking it. The next day, he went downstairs to the community center S parking lot to stand with other people under the pinned sky and pretend for 20 minutes that the town had a single body. The woman handing out water said, "2 per house?" And he nodded. He held the gallons in his hands and carried them home and set them in the corner and felt as you feel when you bring a thing to a house that you believe is good at being a house. I have accomplished something unevenly meaningful. He cut open a box with the long silver knife he used to take glass out of frames, and in the fibrous mouth of the box he found a sheet of printed instructions on how to store water and apologize to yourself for needing it. He put the sheet under the lighthouse magnet on the refrigerator because the refrigerator wanted to be useful. He needed to leave the hall for a day. He made a schedule of rooms to occupy: kitchen, study. Not the hall, not the stairwell. Kitchen again, deli, grocery, walk by the ferry, the tracks at the old mill where kids hang, and the city has made an art installation that pretends a rusted barrel is a relic. He had never attended its opening, but he had admired it on his run of errands. He put his hands in his coat pockets and felt for the old receipt he'd put there days ago, and found it crisp, reticent, a piece of machine-run history you can love if you're desperate to love anything. The grocery was full of men with their sleeves rolled and women with lists. The barcode beeps were a language you can understand no matter where you were schooled. Arthur had always liked this. It was the opposite of the mirror's inside language. It located you on a map. He stood for a minute without shame by the bulk bins and listened, while a woman with a stack of coupons asked a clerk questions, as if each question was a way to keep her mouth exercised against the door it would have to say things behind later. He bought nothing he needed: paper towels, a small cake. The receipt was long, and he folded it and put it under the magnet too, like a recipe you know you will not try. The night that followed was the kind that suggests the building has accepted you if you accept this. Arthur forgot what it is to not listen for the refrigerator's quiet. He woke to it. He forgot what it is to not hear the stairwell lights hum. He woke to it. He forgot what people sound like when they go up and down his street. He heard only the small tells of the house and his body inside the house, like 2 devices running slightly out of phase. The mirrors, when he checked them, had his face. The faces behind his face, woman, soldier, child, were absent because they did not owe him a show. He felt worn out by the idea of seeing them. He felt worn out by the idea of not seeing them. In that exhausted calm, the worst of his fear put on a coat and went out without him. He slept and dreamed of a shop he had visited with his father, staffed by a man who smelled like a wharf you would never eat on. His father had asked the man how old glass manages to keep its lie straight, and the man had said something about metallic salts and uneven flows, and how the world is always a little heavier at the bottom than the top. He had said the word amalgam as if it were a joke. He had bit down on a pipe and made a face like he was eating a hot coin. Arthur woke with the word in his throat. He went to the kitchen and took a sip of water he had boiled earlier and listened to the refrigerator decline to comfort him. When he turned to the hall, he found the whale S-sheet on the floor, and the new mirror had moved 2 inches to the left, its chain never having been long enough to allow it without a deliberate human arm. He stood at the study door and understood that when a house wants to teach you, it will rearrange objects in a way a person would then claim credit for having done. He put the sheet back on the whale, not to cover it, but to fold it across the lower half, and the effect was of a person modest from the waist down. He did the same to the new mirror, an act that could only make sense to someone who lived in a season where the sea had something to say about schedules. He called no one. He did not drink more than he had to. He ate what a person eats to play along. He kept the towel where it went. He timed his face washing to the refrigerator's quiet. He waited for the traffic light on Weaver and Pike to teach him how to get through a short interval and be excused. In that mood, he saw a small thing that made everything stop, pretending this could be placed on a shelf for a later day. The woman in the lace, in the bottom left corner of the whale, moved. It was not a theatrical movement. Her head inclined a degree to the place just above Arthur's shoulder. The soldier's eyes in the opposite corner widened in that little way. Eyes widen inside sockets that do not want to change their shape. The child's mouth took a breath. The place at Arthur's shoulder increased in density. He kept facing the glass. He let his eyes lose focus. He saw the thing he began to think of as not a thing in the reflection, the way you see stars when you are told not to look at them directly. A hole, not black. A pressure that did not cause distortion, because distortion is extravagant. It had a height roughly to the top of his ear. It had a place where the air decided to go around it. It had no face. The faces in the mirrors suffered it. He took a hand from his side and lifted it up and placed it backward behind his neck and moved it through. It went through nothing. The pressure remained. He said out loud, because a body says something when it would like to ask its owner to leave, "No." The word did not bounce. It did not ask the stairwell to oblige it by humming in a friendly register. It did not shrivel the air into a concept. He said no again, quieter because the first had been silly. He stood and let the refrigerator decide to join him in the room. He turned and went to the kitchen and bent and put his head inside the refrigerator, the way a man puts his head into a river to ask for a simple correction, cooling the blood. His breath fogged the jar. He pulled his head out and closed the door with a firm, impolite thud that said, "I am here." The final falling happened when he did the small, brave act of a person who cannot remain forever at the bottom of the stairs, listening to machines. He took the new mirror down and carried it to the study and set it against the wall behind the door with the Striver S-frames. He did it not because he believed his house would honor him, but because he could not stand the infinity trick they had bequeathed to his corridor. He did not cover it. He took the whale off too. The whale in the hands of a man who did not lift for a living was a confession, but he took its weight and stood under it and moved it through the door like a man with a piano and a history. He put it against the far wall where the wide case clock stood. He went back for the olive wood braid. He took them all into the study and made a room out of mirrors the size of a social mistake. He went to the kitchen and made tea and left the ring and said out loud idiotically, "All right." He stood at the threshold of the study. The air in the room did not change. The smell of old silver met him, vinegar and a corner of sugar. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The stairwell light offered its buzz through the wall. He went in. The frames made a city out of the room. The glass expressed nothing except times when people believed in portraits. He stepped forward and the mirrors changed. He thought they changed because of light, because the window's reflection in one bedded itself in the next. Then he saw them as he had seen them before, less theatrical now that he had set the stage. The woman in the dress, the soldier, the child, and others from frames he had not looked into as hard. An old man with a mustache demanding that air be stiff. A girl with hair parted because the part said something about her mother. A hand holding a hat, shoulders turned as if to say polite times had ended. They did not look at him. They looked to a place past his shoulder. He felt the density there again, the subtraction. He decided this was the kind of moment when a man with his habits should make a sound so that he could answer himself with it for the rest of his life. He said, "No." The hand that came up of its own accord touched the air beside him again. He did it gently, like you touch the back of a person you are allowing to pass you without mentioning your own body. His hand felt nothing. He brought his hand down. The woman in the lace in the whale's corner lifted her hands, very slightly, as if to bring them to her face. The soldier's open mouth decided to be rounder. The child turned her head. The fraction of a fraction a neck can move when the rest of the body is not giving permission. Arthur felt a fact move through him. He did not know what the fact was. He believed in it enough to keep his face from being demonstrative. He turned and left the room and shut the door quietly, as if behind it people had just had a fight. He stood in the hall and looked at his hand on the doorknob. He was a man in a sweater in a house with a refrigerator that worked and a window where a traffic light wrote on his wall. He went to the kitchen and found the towel on the oven handle folded wrong, and he changed it just so the day would know there was a person in it who could be counted on. The next day, people at the community center traded small, precise thoughts about water and the way a boil advisory lets you be in charge of something again. He bought the paper because the paper was thin and made a sound, and he liked to walk with it under his arm like someone older and more competent than he is. The headline said little. The city had put a photo of a man in a reflective vest standing in front of a hole in the street and smiling as if to say, not only are we on it, we have decided to be photogenic. He went home, he made tea, he left the ring. He stood looking at the study door and he did not go in. He slept and woke to the chewing and then woke to the traffic light and then woke to the stairwell. He lay in the bed and counted the breaths between the refrigerator's cycle and the moment when it decided to work again. He stood and went to the study, and this time when he opened the door, he did not stand at the threshold, he went right in. The mirrors were there, the faces were there, the woman and the soldier and the child and the old man and the girl, and their open mouths and their eyes turned to the place behind his shoulder. He felt the air there, denser, a presence of absence. He closed his eyes and then opened them again because he had promised himself he would not pretend. He raised his hand, palm to the air. He moved it through that place, not because he believed it would answer, but because every picture of an exorcism he had ever mocked instructs a body and a hand to do something. In the plane of the mirror in front of him, one he had not favored, a plain rectangle with a thin, mean frame, he saw a figure stand behind him. It did not have features. This was not a failure of the glass. It stood at the exact half-shadow where only the knowledge of a person shapes an outline. It was the shape of a city official when a city official believes they have accidentally arrived at a room where they can confess. It was the shape of what you feel when a person decides to leave and announces it, and then tells you he is staying after all. It was the shape of a density of air at her shoulder. He looked at it in the glass for as long as he could, and then he did something he had not done since he had been a boy, moving through a kitchen while a man at a table read a paper and waited for someone to say the wrong thing. He turned his head with extreme slowness and looked at the place where his shoulder was to see if the room would give him the gift of an image. If the room did, he missed it because his body chose then to be sick. He put his hand to his mouth because he would not hurt his floor. He stood, and then his knees did what knees do when they discover that blood is going somewhere else alone. He made it to the kitchen. He leaned with his head against the cold of the refrigerator door and forgave it for humming. He made himself a tea he did not drink. He wiped the ring and let a new ring make itself and did not wipe it. He took the towel and did not fold it. He let it hang crooked and found he could read himself in that. It would have been pure to abandon the mirrors the next day and call a man with a van and tell him to take them to a market or to the river. But he understood that the thing he had remained faithful to all his life was not objects but the attention to objects that makes a house let a person live in it. He could not leave them. He also did not think he was allowed to. He opened the study door at intervals, the way a parent checks a child when the child has been quiet for too long and has stopped making the sounds children make when they are inventing a private world in a corner of the kitchen. He listened. He watched. He made small notes in the ledger by the door that were not so much sentences as the beginnings of someone reporting to the town. 2:13 uniformed man, gestures with jaw. 2:21 child moves to look toward the floor. 3:05 density at shoulder greater. 3:20 refrigerator cycle lengthens. 3:22 stairwell light louder. 3:28 traffic light pattern unchanged. He told himself a story about why he was required for this, and it was ridiculous, and it was true. He believed he owed the dead his vigilance. He could not have told you why these faces belonged to the dead, except that his mind would not let him put them among the living. He did not pray. He did not sing. He did not drink. He did not call Miriam and ask her to tell him who he was. He sat on the kitchen chair and laid the towel in his lap as if it were a small animal, and when the night came with its chewing, he said in the direction of the study, "No." And then after a minute, because he is also an honest man, he said, "All right." It was on a morning with that spring color that travels in a diagonal through rooms that he realized there was a new face in a glass. In the thin silver rectangle he had bought last summer at a church sale in the bottom right quarter, where the oxidation had taken the glass back for itself, a man's face had appeared half transparent, as if the mirror had been made in a hurry. The face looked like a man who has a collection of mirrors, whose towel is wrong that day, whose refrigerator is telling him something only he gets to pretend is not news. The man's mouth was open. The man's eyes were turned not at him, but to a place past his shoulder. Arthur moved until he could put his own face over that face and line their mouths, and in the space between his mouth and the glass, he felt a brief change in temperature, the way you feel your own breath when it betrays you. He stepped away, and the ghost of him remained for a breath, and then the mirror was simply what it was, a glass with a room. He sat on the floor. He put his ledger on his knee. He wrote nothing. He did the acts a person does when they can feel their body giving back to the room. He got up and went down to the deli and bought a coffee and did not take sugar. The barcode scanner beeped like a nervous system. The traffic light at the corner of the deli performed a series that suggested the city was experimenting with a new algorithm. The ferry horn announced a departure. A woman pushed a stroller past him uphill with her head down in the way that felt like a prayer not addressed to anyone. He passed the community center. The notice board that week held a new page from the city. The language extended into apology and then back again into instruction. Services at reduced capacity. Please consolidate trips. Affiliation with official resources recommended. They had not written the words out of an abundance this time. They had written proceed within guidelines. It did not matter. When he unlocked his door, the stairwell light came on with its special sound, its insect hymn. He stood and let it sound through him. He put his hand on the banister and felt the throb of the building. The way stubborn wood tells your hand what you've decided to do. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed, and he thanked it privately for not being terrible. He walked to the study with his arms at his sides and stopped at the threshold and thought, I am done looking at this. And he went in anyway. The whale stood opposite the study window, the light falling to it as if by arrangement. The woman in the lace looked the way a person looks when she recognizes that she is losing the person who tells the room what to think of her. The soldier was the soldier. The child looked up as if she meant to ask for anything at all. Past his shoulder, the density waited as if to say it could do this forever. He had found no way to believe that could be both true and harmless. He moved to stand in front of the whale with his hands at his sides, and then, because he liked the house and the little private contract he had with its heat and its routines and its stairwell, he stepped closer. He placed his palm on the glass. It was cold. There is cold from metal, and there is cold from having discovered one's own end. He had never met the second, and he refused to classify this one. The glass gave back his warmth in a way that suggests a person will be in a room only as long as the room finds it economical. In the reflection, he could see in the far edge the shape, not a thing, a subtraction. It moved not at all, and the air learned around it. He said a word that did not matter to anybody. He said Miriam. The mirrors do not accept names, they do not say them back. But in the whale, in the bottom right corner, a face he had not seen among the rest stood up. It was not her. It could not be her. It had the shape of a person who had loved him and left him a note in a drawer in his study asking him to call. He made the face take too much of his attention, and the woman in the lace lost him, and the soldier, and the child. He let the face take what it wanted, and then it was gone, and the cold at his hand went deeper for a moment and then gave up and turned itself back into world. The refrigerator S-compressor clicked, and the hallway carried that click to the study as if it were a message. The traffic light sketched a small purity through the transom. The stairwell light made itself into the insect again. The chewing started, but only in the house, not in the mirrors. He stood because his body still let him do small acts without permission. He turned. In the mirror, his back looked like any man's back. In the mirror, in the space behind his shoulder, the hole in the world stayed a hole. He left the house and went down Weaver Street and watched the ferry for a little while. He stood by the tideboard and pretended he was still young enough to think tide is a god. He put his fingers in his coat pocket and took them out again. He went to the grocery and let the barcode scanner sing at him. He bought a towel in a pattern he had not allowed in 20 years and put it on the oven handle, crooked. He took a receipt and set it under the lighthouse magnet and did not fold it. He boiled water. He filled a jar. He set a mug on the counter, and when he lifted it, he let the ring stay. He opened the study door and stood and listened to the chewing, and then did not. He closed the study door. In the night, he woke and lay still and let the air do what it does when it knows you have decided. You will not be tricked into discovering whether you are alone. He felt the pressure at his shoulder. It did not ask for anything because it can. He lay there until the refrigerator woke itself and offered to help, until the stairwell asked to be confessed, until a siren on pike predicted without trying. He held his hand up over his face, and in the dark it was the shape of his own honesty. He turned his palm toward himself and felt the warmth in that hollow where you can read a life if you think a hand is a language. He wondered if, in the morning, he would find there a white point, a small, hard spot announcing itself in the top layer of his skin, the way a district announces its valves. He thought of that word again, amalgam, and the meaner word underneath it the man with the pipe had not meant to give him: togetherness. He did not sleep. He did not open the study door when the day measured itself along a wall. When noon came with its humility, he put on his coat. He stood with his hand on the knob and imagined two things: opening the door and finding the faces and their attention where it would remain. Opening the door and finding the frames reflecting nothing, the subtraction having finished its work of subtraction. He took his hand off the knob. He went downstairs instead. On the building S notice board, a new paper had been taped up with its corners beginning to lift the days. Damp pressing its weight into the paper. S thin bones. Power conservation recommended during peak hours. Community center hours reduced. Ferry cancellations possible due to staffing. The signatures at the bottom were the names of men and women whose faces he could not have picked out in a crowd, though he knew the way they spoke on the radio. He went back upstairs. He put his ear to the study door. He heard nothing he could use to become better. He took the mug down and made tea and left the ring, then made another cup and left that one too, so that the counter held two circles like a number that could instruct a person. He wrote nothing in the ledger. The towel hung crooked on the oven handle. He let it. He washed his hands with the boiled water and dried them on the towel, because for some reason he believed towels had been made to forgive. He stood in the hall. He did not look into any glass. When the evening came and the traffic light performed, when the refrigerator was a faithful dog, when the stairwell hum dignified him, he opened the study door. And whatever he had decided to think, the room lived the way it had been living. The faces in their frames, with their attention, where he could not exert himself to enter. The subtraction at his shoulder with its faithful density, the glass with its cold that was not a person's, the silence a place has when it refuses. He stood and did not touch anything but the room with his breath. He made the shape of the word Miriam with his mouth and learned what his tongue looks like in a strip of glass already given to something else. Later, when a neighbor let himself in with a key to bring a bag of groceries, because the city had asked people to be something to somebody, he would look down the long hall and see a set of frames and a heavy Baroque mirror and a thin silver and a narrow olive wood braid, and he would believe he saw nothing in them. When a woman from the community center came by with 2 gallons of water because the boil order had lifted and then was back and then lifted again, and she was tired, she would look down the hall with kindness and see nothing alarming. When the landlord opened the door and saw the towel wrong and the rings on the counter and the ledger and the city notices under magnets and the jars and the mugs and the receipts and the study door open, he would call Arthur by his name into the house and then stand because he did not want to go down the hall. He would smell the refrigerator working. He would hear the traffic light throw itself in squares onto a bare wall. He would listen to the stairwell hum and feel affirmed. He would not go into the study. He would say, into the room, into the air, into the place where a shoulder is and does not require him, hello? And the study would answer him in the house's register, which is not a register made with vocal cords. He would put the bag down on the counter and notice the mugs and frown because rings. The faces in the frames, if any person with a sensitivity for rooms had gone looking, would be there, their mouths open in the right amount of terror for the hour their eyes turned to a place past the shoulder of whoever had walked in. In the thin silver in the bottom right quarter, a man's face with an open mouth would remain half visible, the glass too fatigued to hold him fully. He would not be noticed by anyone except the company of his own. He would be standing where a person stands when a person has made a room his faithful subject and then has the room ask for equal time. When the river rose on the next spring's tide and put its iron breath into the kitchen through the open window, because in towns with ferries windows can be open in Aprils, the refrigerator would hum for someone else. The stairwell light would break and be replaced. The traffic light would be put on a new program that lengthened the yellow by half a beat. The barcode beeps at the hardware store would proceed. The tide board would be printed instead of chalked. The hose water in the stairwell sink would run clear, then grey, then clear again, and the pipe would complain. The towel on the oven handle would be folded by some hand and unfolded by that hand later in the day, in the universal mindlessness of kitchens. The ledger by the study door would have entries in a careful script whose author did not give himself away by how he formed an S. Under 305, 320, 328, a last line in smaller writing, and then the pen runs out of courage. The rings on the counter would darken until someone with a ruinous white cleaner removed them, and the counter became a neutral space again. And in the long corridor, with the baroque whale and the thin silver and the olive wood braid and the terrible bright rectangle, he never loved each time the lamplight came down Weaver Street and wrote itself on the glass. A set of faces would perform their rehearsal for anyone who found themselves honest enough to look their eyes turned toward a place just past the shoulder of whoever had been invited by the hall to remain. When they looked, it would not be for a spirit with a face. It would be a habit. It would be the habit the town had taught them all by asking them to wait. The city would keep sending notices out of an abundance. Proceed within guidelines. Boil, do not boil. The ferry horn would throw its low out across the houses like a hand telling a person what time is. He will be there, whether anyone can say it. Not trapped, watching. Standing where the void is, the way we taught it to be. With him, with us, because we gave it a corridor. And a schedule and a refrigerator and the intelligence of an exit sign. He will not speak the way a person speaks. He will say no. He will say all right. He will be the thing in the hall behind your shoulder, the cold, the necessary subtraction that perfect surfaces return to when rooms are asked to be rooms. And someone somewhere will step quietly to the counter and set down a mug and lift it again and see a ring and leave it. Because there are days when leaving a record where everyone will see it is the way to keep a house alive enough to watch over itself.